Welcome to Design Muse Podcast, a podcast meant to inspire, educate, and advocate on all things commercial interior design. I am your co-host, Bridget Santos.
And I'm Melanie Hanna.
We are Design Muse Podcast. Welcome back to Design Muse Podcast. We are so excited to do our first virtual podcast session today. We will be taking on the huge topic of FF&E, furniture, a lot of our experiences of dealing with FF&E, the different ways that we've learned that FF&E can be done in this industry, and then how it differs from sector to sector. We are so excited to tackle this big topic and to talk about all things furniture and FF&E.
Well, thank you guys for being here today again. And first off, I want to start off with multifamily. I think that is one of the sectors that Bridget and I are very passionate about. And there's a lot of different ways to do things, as Bridget mentioned. And let's just start off from the very beginning on the proposal side of things. So you get a job, and sometimes it has FF&E in it, and sometimes it doesn't. For those of you that are listening that know nothing about interior design, FF&E is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And so we will try to stop and say these little acronyms, what they are along the way. But let's start there. So you get a new job, Bridget, and you're gearing up. The client says, okay, we want furniture. And what's the next step?
Yeah, so the way that I was taught and the way that I still do it to this day is if we receive a FF&E request for a proposal, a RFP, as it's known as an acronym, we go through all of the plans. So we furnish everything from interior spaces to exterior spaces to dog park trash cans to all the site furnishings as well. So our first step is always to study the drawings, see what furniture is going where, make sure that we put together a really, really comprehensive budget. So we always start with the budget. Everybody does budgets a little bit different, either by room or by space, by amenity. The way that I personally do it is every single piece has a line item. So it could be a huge multifamily job, and we are breaking it down to every single chair, every single side table, every single rug, accessory, drapery, everything. So we go space by space and we break down a budget of all the line items of furniture. We do that for the interior. We do that for the exterior. We also budget out the cost for shipping and handling, receiving, storage, and installation, which we can talk about that a little bit more in the podcast. So we'll have multiple line items that also include the tax, any fees associated with the FF&E package, whether it's a design fee or a procurement fee. Everybody kind of does it a little bit differently. Maybe you assume all those costs in your line items, and then we have a grand total. So our first step is always providing a super comprehensive FF&E budget. What I always tell my team is the last thing I want to do is go to a developer or client and say, oh, we missed this space on the plans and we didn't account for the FF&E in that space. Our budget, interior design FF&E budget, also, they usually have other FF&E going on in that space that we aren't providing. So that's something to always ask the client is the FF&E budget that you're giving me, is that inclusive of the fitness equipment as well? Is that inclusive of your, leasing equipment, the computers, all the things that, the interior design team isn't going to furnish? So I think all those questions up front are super important to ask a developer or client. Make sure that you're being comprehensive with the budget and really going through, and it really just comes with experience, knowing what to price things at. I think I get that question the most is when you're pricing out a club room, for example, how do you know what to price for that sofa? There's a lot of things that go into that. What level of project are we at? Are there special or that we want to use, and what are the price of those? We're always keeping up with vendor pricing and knowing where we need to be, kind of a good, better, best scenario. And some clients will come to us with a budget. Hey, we have $500,000 to furnish this multifamily complex. That'll include, 2 model units, outdoor, indoor, the whole gambit. And we will work backwards from that budget too and say, okay, we were allotted 500 grand. What does that put us at for each line item? So we'll work a little bit backwards to hit that $500,000 budget and say, okay, that allows us to spend about $500 for a dining chair, or it'll allow us to spend X amount. With experience too comes with knowing where to put that money within a multifamily complex.
Exactly. Much like the interior design side of it, so the interior architecture, if you will, it's about your first impression and knowing where to spend that money because you're not going to be able to necessarily have the same quality throughout the entire space. They may, for instance, if you have offices within that multifamily project, they're not going to want to spend the same amount of money for a side chairs in your first impression at your lobby. So knowing where to spend the money, it just comes with time and wisdom. And I think one of the biggest things with furniture is always ask questions to your teammates and collaborate. And especially for those that have been in the industry for a while, never be afraid to ask questions because there's lots of parts and pieces that come with a furniture package and it can get very confusing very quickly. One of the things that I think a lot of designers ask about is so sometimes with interior design, we get brought on very early, and then sometimes we get brought on a little bit later. And say an architecture team is space planning out things and they diagrammatically lay out a furniture layout. And the first thing is that's our job as interior designers within our if that's within your scope to be able to really rethink about that. So don't get stuck on maybe something that someone has put as a placeholder in there just to show space. And so our job is to really also look at the layout, make sure it's going to make sense. And as you're developing that budget, assign those different items. And one another thing is that being organized up front really will pay off in the end. And there's a lot of different ways to do it, but even tagging furniture, I always like to have my floor plan and tagging those items the same nomenclature as what's in my budget and building upon that. That's version 1. And maybe, I'm assigning the same kind of price of value of lounge chairs and space A and space B, but space C is maybe a little bit lower quality, so it's $1,000 less. But it's assigning those items of those values of what you think are going to be different up front, and then building upon that. And another thing I'll also mention for young designers is ask so many questions up front on how a firm does their furniture packages. Every firm I've been at is a little bit different, down to even the abbreviations, to seating goods, to case goods, drapery, all the different things. And just know per sector it's going to be different. Don't go into a new firm and assume it's one way. So really understand the standards because that'll save you a lot of time up front. And you assign this budget, Bridget. And next step is really making sure that you're on the same page with your client and you get that budget approved. And you're working backwards from there. You have this total. So another thing I think designers get caught up on is this price per piece. It's like, yes, you want that's your guide to go by, but then it's a kind of a numbers game of balancing. And so say an owner says, "Hey, I really want this marble conference table and this collaboration area." Okay, well, we didn't allow for $15,000 there. We only allowed 10,000. So where are we going to take it out at? And so you have to start playing a numbers game and really looking at it and evaluating it, not just picking it because it's beautiful. Our job is really to be a resource and hear our clients and understand them and be able to put all these different pieces together. It's really a big puzzle, is really all it is when you start to think about it. And so you get the budget, you start selecting the piece, you have the approved budget, you start selecting the pieces. Okay, so let's talk about we're on multifamily here. So, what types of pieces or types of brands, how do you source? How do you know where to go? Do you go to a dealer? Do you go to manufacturers? Can we talk about open lines versus closed lines?
Yeah, so it's interesting in multifamily. There are interior design firms that do not procure all the furniture, so everything they're specifying into their furniture package would need to be outsourced to a dealer to then decide, like how much that full package is worth. The way that I do it and the way that I learned to do it was we do everything in house. We're designing that furniture package, we're procuring it all. We are there from start to finish, warehousing it, and we are installing it. In that scenario, and there's multifamily firms who don't do that too, just so you guys know, there are multifamily firms that just specify the furniture as well and create the package. There's fees that go along for that, and then they outsource the procurement and warehousing. With being a company that's full service and we're doing everything from procurement to warehousing to installation, we start with, knowing our lead times, number one. I think with experience, you have to understand that certain vendors have a longer lead time than others. When you're pricing out your budget for FF&E, you really need to understand that, hey, if they have a really tight budget, it's probably going to be a longer lead time item because it's coming from somewhere across the world and being shipped over in containers or whatever it is. A lot of it is knowledge and experience, but also just getting very inundated with what vendors have to offer. There's new vendors that pop up all the time. There's new manufacturers that pop up all the time. In our case, we act as the dealer. We are purchasing directly from manufacturers for open lines. What that means is a lot of people are familiar with Four Hands, for example. They're a top manufacturer of furniture. They're located in Austin, Texas, a really, really great manufacturer. We have an account directly with them. We act as the dealer when we're selling it to our developers, to our clients. So we wouldn't go to another dealer to procure a Four Hands product that we have a direct account with. It helps save our clients money. It helps, like cut out a little bit of a middleman situation. We go directly, we would purchase it, and we know those vendors that we have those lines with. I think it's important too to know which vendors fall within your price point, which manufacturers you have either the direct access to or through, if you are using a dealer, who they have direct access to. To Melanie's point, her question was clotheslines versus open lines. Corporate furniture, meaning desking systems, office furniture, task chairs, the high-end kind of corporate furniture. A lot of those lines are clotheslines, meaning I have to go to a dealer who has that account with that manufacturer, whether it's national or any type of case good. It's going to have to go through a dealer. And the only way you can become a dealer of a clothesline corporate line would be you basically have to sell X amount per year. So if your whole job isn't to just sell that corporate furniture, it's going to be hard to become a dealer of that clothesline. We've looked into it before just with the amount that we purchase and see, hey, could we get in with those clotheslines and become a direct dealer? There's just a lot more hoops to jump through. So multifamily specifically, the amount of corporate furniture that you're buying that are clotheslines is not that much. So we're talking about a couple leasing offices, couple leasing chairs, like back of house. Most everything else in the multifamily project, we are purchasing direct from a manufacturer. That's a little bit of a difference between a clothesline and open line. And then the way that we keep track of it at Emerson James Studio is we have a system that has all of our manufacturers in it that we, partner with and purchase from. Everybody has a different way of how you purchase. If you're logging into a site online and purchasing and pulling, or if you have to reach out to a rep to, get pricing and finishes for it. We keep a detailed list of basically, hey, if you're going to Four Hands, this is the login and this is the way you do it and this is the way you document. If you're going to Uttermost, this is the way that you do it and that you document it. So it's just a little bit different for every vendor. It takes time to build that, and it takes time to build that knowledge and the best vendors to use and how to operate a clothesline versus an open line.
That's a really great point. And a lot of the firms that I've been at, they keep a whole database of different manufacturers. Some of them don't, surprisingly. And so when I get there, I'm recreating a will, and I think it's so important for every designer to have really your own database of different manufacturers that you like to use per sector. Time is money, which we've talked about several times on this podcast. A lot of times there's different ways to set your fees for these, but a lot of times they're lump sum or negotiated fees, and so we're really having to be careful with our time. So the more in interior design that you can set up shortcuts for yourself and have those resources, and spending time up front is really important on that. And then that way you know where to go with uttermost, or you know, like you were saying about the specifications, you know how to specify it, and you know what questions to ask, and that kind of thing, because it really does help be more successful on these projects. Firms end up losing a lot of money on it because they spin their wheels. And it's one of those things, as you grow in your career, you learn to make quick decisions, and tell that story with the furniture and the accessories. Because accessories is part of this too. Art is part of this. If you don't have an art consultant on board, a lot of times we're getting asked to even buy, things that are like tchotchkes or vases, or uh, books are a common one. Knowing your resources of, yes, there is a vendor out there that has every color book. And if you want them to all be blue, a certain shade, you can have that. If you don't know that, that's why you're hiring an interior designer, because we have those resources and we can specify it really quickly and efficiently for you guys. In my opinion, it shouldn't be something that a client's like, hey, my wife or my cousin or my daughter will do it. It's like, let's go ahead and take this all the way forward. And that way it really is congruent message. So multifamily is definitely one way to specify furniture. With you kind of touched on the corporate side of things, it gets to be a little bit different game. When you have a corporate job as an interior designer, you're working the space plans, test fits is what we call them, very early on. If you sometimes you have the furniture package and sometimes you don't. When you do have it, you're laying out diagrammatically all these different workstations. Say there's 6 by 6. You're trying to plan for power. You're trying to plan for all these different things. And these desk systems, I kid you not, have 500 million parts to them, parts and pieces. And so working with a dealer is very important. Now, when it comes to workstations, you can have the Escort Sport of the workstation, or you can have the Cadillac, and everywhere between. It's all different bells and whistles. It's all different warranty plans. It's all how easy is it to replace just one mechanism? Because when you're going with that cheapest brand, you're going to be replacing the entire system. They don't have those parts and pieces like a Herman Miller brand or a steel case. When you're looking at corporate jobs, it's really important to look at longevity and the end goal is for the clients. It's not just about the aesthetics of it or the storytelling aspect of it. It really starts to get very technical. And then you're dealing with floor cores and furniture whips and a lot of different things. And oops, that contractor put the floor core 1 foot over. Now my workstations don't work. There's a lot of different parts and pieces in it. I always like to work with dealerships, which are clotheslines for those. So you're, looking at, there's all kinds of different manufacturers out there. And I think the best thing I would say as a designer that you could do as far as that goes is get out there to the showrooms and meet the different reps and have allies for these different pricing groups that your clients can afford, because we're ultimately designing to our clients' budget. If they can only afford that Escort Sport, awesome. You better have some resources in your bag of tricks that you're going to be able to meet that budget. If, they have more of a budget of, a Cadillac budget, then know where those brands fall. And so it's our job to really keep up with the design times that are changing, and to know what resources are out there for our client. And the more knowledge that you can gain and the more resources that you have, the better when it comes to that. I think a lot of it is we're seeing a swing in corporate right now. Everything is starting to be more hospitality driven. Hospitality has infiltrated a lot of the different sectors right now. I have a corporate job right now. This is the first time I've ever specified forehands on a corporate job. It's been more on student housing or multifamily or hospitality. That's exciting to see. Now, one of the things is that it's harder to get samples of these things for sit test and things like that. So that's one of the things that I've had to explain to the clients. I can't get necessarily samples of these where you can go to a showroom and see every single thing or every single finish. There's a lot that goes into it. So with that, backing up with corporate, so you develop a budget that's very similar in nature to the multifamily. You get your budget approved, your lump sum, and then you're still working backwards from there of all the parts and pieces. I find that I'm typically working on furniture packages sooner in corporate than I am in multifamily or student housing. And sometimes that has to do with the construction schedule because a TI project is going to be a lot shorter of a span than, say, a student housing, multifamily, or hospitality project. With that being said, a lot of times you're going out to a few dealers to bid the projects. You're not necessarily working with a procurement team. You can, but it's not necessarily the norm for that. But going out to the different dealerships and bidding it, and then sometimes it's client driven on, hey, use this one. Sometimes they just want to use the low bidder. Sometimes they say, okay, interior designer, who do you want to use? So there's different ways to look at it. Depends on the client itself. But they are responsible at that point for basically the procurement side of it. So purchasing it, installing it. And the interior designer at that point is they're on site making sure the install goes well, doing a punch list for the furniture. They're not necessarily purchasing it. You can, but a lot of it necessarily is closed lines, so it doesn't always happen that way.
And I think on the corporate side too, to your point, working with the right dealer is so important. Melanie touched a little bit on all the pieces and parts. When it comes to corporate furniture, you are specifying every single piece. So partnering with the right dealer who knows their stuff is super important because we're talking about, hey, this leg needs to be matte black finish, but then I want the desk to be this veneer, and then I need a box file with the locking mechanism. That locking mechanism needs to be matte black to match the. I mean, it is like one desking system can be 5 pages long of a spec.
Do you want individual keys for each desk, or do you want a master key, or do you want card readers, or do you want no locks, or do you want coat hooks? Do you want the list goes on. It is a lot of decisions, and interior designers make so many decisions that I think that, again, going back to this whole social media world, this whole Instagram, this TikTok, a lot of just because a lot of people have these videos out there, they assume interior designers, they're just picking finishes. And again, Design Muse, what we want to do is to really shed light on the commercial interior design aspect and touch on all these different decisions that we have to make. And our hourly fee is not just about our overhead, and it's really about our wisdom that we bring to the table. And we're trying to help you save time and money and not have to redo things 5 times because it's not done correctly the first time. You're paying for wisdom is what you're paying for. Just like a lawyer or a doctor, we say this a lot, time is money. It's a lot of different decisions. Back to the furniture side of it. Let's talk about hospitality for a second. This could be a whole thing in and of itself. Everything is pretty much custom. Not always, but there are a lot of things that end up being custom. The specifications I found are a lot more intense. Different firms do different things. Some do specifications that are very similar to a project manual. So everything has a sheet or two. The first sheet has pictures, line drawings, all the information on it. And again, every firm has a different nomenclature for all of this and a different way they do it. In hospitality, it's very, very detailed. So it's not just the seat height, it is actually your seat cushion. What foam density do you want? Are you tufting it? Do you have a welt cord? What color is that welt cord? On one chair, there may be a good 100 decisions that are on there. And then since a lot of it is custom or you have line drawings, and it depends on where your project is too. I started out my career working on a lot of projects in China, Macau, and Turkey and Dubai. There was no, we're going to ship this from this one place. They were going to make everything. It becomes very challenging because you're making a line drawing for everything and you're responsible for it. You are adding dimensions to that, see it height and that back height and all the things. And a lot of it, it really, especially with your model room and which is going to be your when you're under construction, it's your guest room type that usually they'll do a queen and a king. Most of that is going to be custom because they may have 200 rooms, 300 rooms, 400 rooms, 500 rooms, and they're repeating it so many times. There's a lot of benefits on the pricing side to get that right. You have to have that wisdom of really knowing how to specify that. Another thing on the specifications, and I know we were saying FF&E furniture. So in hospitality, your carpet and your drapery is not in your construction documents. It's actually in your FF&E specifications. Same thing with any kind of decorative lights. So this light that's above me right now would be in an FF&E specification. A lot of people would think just lamps. No, sconces, anything that's hardwired in that is not a mudded in fixture or a general lighting fixture is included. It's a lot to know. It's a it's a lot to grasp.
I think you hit the nail on the head by saying, how hospitality differs with everything being so custom. There's just that much more decisions and more work to make sure that that custom piece is also fitting where it needs to go. A lot of times, we do have this push in multifamily to be very hospitality feeling, we're framing out a niche for a beautiful banquette. We've got to make sure that is perfectly custom to fit within that space and you don't have the weird gaps on either side and you have power integrated into those banquettes. And how do you want the back? Do you want leather buckles over the top? Just all the different aspects to it. Guest rooms is a whole different scenario in hospitality and all the types that you have to list out and make sure that everything's fitting appropriately with that same guest room look, but different size beds, different size rooms. And, in multifamily, I did a project where we furnished partial units with Murphy bed systems. It was a micro unit project. And the demographic that they were going after is kind of this midpoint. You graduate college, you're not ready to buy a home and furnish it yet, but you can come into a furnished little micro unit. And trying to get all of those Murphy beds with the power on the correct side of the Murphy beds, the blocking where it needs to be in the wall. And, if you're hanging the bed, if you're hanging nightstands, if you're wiring something in, all of those little details that are FF&E are so important to know during design and during construction. I think to Melanie's point, different sectors introduce FF&E at different times. Multifamily seems to be the one sector where it kind of comes in last. You're kind of fitting it into the space versus a lot of the other sectors. You are designing it around the FF&E and how it integrates as a whole. Just a little bit of a different approach, but with the big push of hospitality and multifamily, we're getting a little bit of that blend as well.
For sure. I want to go back to the banquettes. Banquettes are one of the biggest areas of mistakes that I see that happen that designers will throw in that Revit model. They don't understand that the seat depth or the back height or the slant of the back. I would just really challenge you guys today to really learn and reach out to your local dealers. I'll give a shout out to AEC here in Dallas. They're amazing. My team went and toured recently their factory. If you haven't had an opportunity to do that, definitely reach out to them because they showed us cut throughs of banquettes. We got to sit in different seats and we actually changed one of our current projects, the depth of the seat while we were there because we realized it's hey, we were a little bit deep or we were a little bit short on this. And so don't just assume because a lounge chair has that depth in it that that's the correct depth, because if you're going to have pillows back behind, you want it to be deeper. You want it to lounge back. But if you're in a situation where you're collaborating, maybe you want somebody to sit up a little bit straighter, or you're studying, or really need to know that intent of it and ask questions to those. That goes back to your resources, because there's so many different parts and pieces of it. How do you want the side of the banquette to look? If your banquette is not side to side, how do you want that finished off? Do you want that bolster to roll around? Do you want it to end? Do you want a wood cap on there? Do you want what size base do you want? And hey, does that align with your other base that you specified on the project? There's a lot of different things that go into it. And just use your resources. And hey, when you make a mistake, make it right. And then don't do it again. Learn from it. And that's part of the growth side of it.
Yeah, and I would say if you're a new designer and you're just starting out in this FF&E world, when I first started interior design, I was at a firm with Melanie where we really didn't have a lot of hands into FF&E. We were a lot more technical, architecturally driven interior design team, amazing firm. It really wasn't until I progressed my career to Dallas where FF&E really opened my eyes and I saw just way more FF&E and how to do FF&E, and it was kind of my first exposure to it. Like Melanie said, the best way is to start using your resources. Those dealer reps, those manufacturer reps, they're there to help you and they're there to guide you. If you miss a step, if you forget to add that power into that banquette, or if you forget to specify how it rolls to the side or the side condition. A good rep, a good manufacturer rep or dealer rep is going to say, hey, need to fill in the blanks here. Another system for banquettes, we implemented it into our system, is to have a banquet form. So we created like a template, a form of everything, every decision that needs to be made on that banquet. It has a little room for a line drawing if you have a line drawing or an inspo image that you want to provide to the manufacturer, and really going through every single step. Okay, did I get the base? Did I get the grain, wood grain? Did I specify the right materials in the, vinyl on the seat or whatever it is? How do I want the back channeled? What density foam do we want? How's the edge finish? So as you go and you keep learning about FF&E, you learn some tips and tricks to make it a little bit more, streamlined to not make mistakes. So I think that also just comes with learning, using your resources. And the best way to know about FF&E is to go sit on it, to go see it, to see what you like, to go run your nail across it and see if it's going to tear. Or I cannot tell you how many times I have been at a property and I'm like the weirdo in the corner flipping the chairs upside down, trying to see who the manufacturer is and like, oh, okay. I know who that is, or I've never used them before. I need to look into that. If I see furniture holding up well at a hotel, at another multifamily property, I'm the first one flipping all of that furniture over, looking for the manufacturer. And most of the time I know who it is. And I'm like, I couldn't afford it on the last one or whatever it is. But you'd be surprised. There's an endless amount of vendors. I think in our system, we have 275 manufacturers and vendors. That's a lot. We're a small firm, and luckily we all kind of have that knowledge base. But the system that we use, so we can talk about, FF&E systems and how to specify and how to procure and all of that too. We use a system called Studio Designer. If you haven't heard of it, it is incredible. It is a full accounting software with a three-way matching system that you can input all of your FF&E into. And for designers, we like pictures, we like receipts attached, we like all those things. So that program can do everything for you. That has been one of the best things that we have invested in, not only like to buy the software, but to learn it all and for everyone to learn it all. We can create our budgets into that software, and then that budget can have a component, which is a piece that we're now specifying to make sure that, okay, well, here's the budget, here's what we want to buy, how's our pricing on it? And so we can print reports that show where we're at as we're specifying compared to the budget and how much do we have left to spend. So the right software for FF&E is so important. I've done it every other way. I've done it old school ways. I've done it, all the things. It's just the human error aspect of it is tough with FF&E. I mean, there's so many different pieces and parts that you're specifying. You come into a firm, you see they have 250 different manufacturers and vendors. What are the ones that we actually use? We probably use about 8, that are really, really good, that we have a good experience with. We always have those other options if it's project specific, or, we have a little bit more of a budget. But in the multifamily world, there's probably about 8 good ones that a lot of people use over and over because of price point, because of quality, and going out to the trade shows, going to High Point, going to, Vegas market, going to all those places to see what is new, what is coming, what is the next new thing, neocon for corporate side of things. I think it's important to attend those shows and really see what's happening in the FF&E world. And I think one of the biggest things about FF&E design is organization and knowing exactly a piece and part. Everybody's going to make a mistake. And, you said before, you just fix it and move on. There's been times where I go out and I'm like, wow, we missed this whole elevator lobby. We didn't even clock it in the budget. Okay.
There's one other thing I want to mention about hospitality that's a little bit different. So, and sometimes you'll find that developers and multifamily or student housing have this too, but not to this extent. When you're working on a hotel, depending on the brand, you have to be brand approved. So we talked in one of our episodes a little bit about just brands in general for hospitality, but on the furniture side, you have to be on that approved list, and even materiality too. So whether it's carpets or whether it's furniture, whether it's custom furniture or it's an open line, because we do specify open lines on hospitality. So don't think that everything is custom, but and some of it is, hey, you only get these parts and pieces and these are brand approved, that kind of thing. One of the biggest things you can do is when you start an FF&E package, if you're working on a hospitality project, you really need to understand those brand standards and understand what you can and can't select from. You really need to read that Bible first before you get started, because it will save you a lot of heartache in the end if you're in not having to go back and redo something 3 times because it doesn't fit that, or you're trying to get it approved and you better really want to get it approved to go through that process. And so that's really important to understand on the hospitality side, is that it is driven by brand. Unless it's independent or a boutique hotel, you have a little bit more leeway there. But if it's a Marriott, a Hilton, that kind of thing, it really, you need to understand the game that you're in and understand the sector. Just know that there's so many different ways to do different things, and you're going to learn as you go. Bridget hit the nail on the head. It's organization is what it's really about, and understanding the client's budget and designing towards that. More than anything, listening to your clients up front and communicating along the way, I cannot enforce that enough, is really important. Really, really important when it comes to furniture.
And I think maybe a good way to end our chat today would be to give the biggest lesson learned that you've ever had in FF&E. I can start because I already know mine. My biggest lesson learned in FF&E was at a previous firm. We were furnishing a project. It was outdoor chase lounges. It torrentially downpoured, and we were getting calls. These Chase Lounge cushions are not draining. They're holding all the water in it, just issues with the cushions. And we all went out back on site, of course, ready to make it right and make sure that we make the appropriate switches and fixes that we need. We have the manufacturer there with us to help us and figure that out, which is so important, and why you use such good, credible manufacturers. That was my biggest lesson learned on outdoor cushions. Need to drain through, and the bottom side of the cushions should not be wrapped in fabric. There should be a mesh material on the back, and you should have mold resistant foam, and you should have it flowing out the bottom. So these cushions, they were recovered locally by, an upholstery plate, and they wrapped it all full of fabric, and they didn't include that mesh part that the water needs to drain through. So I will never in my career not have a self-drained outdoor cushion. That was my biggest lesson learned in FF&E and probably biggest, mistake. I mean, we had to go back and really get all those outdoor cushions properly functioning and lesson learned that you've got to think about all obstacles.
So while we're talking about outdoor furniture, you really need to understand the wind loads for different areas. If it's on a terrace, and depending on even the area, because it needs to be weighted appropriately for that, so they don't blow off. You don't want to be responsible for a chair blowing off and hitting someone from 20 levels above. I think that that's another thing that a lot of people just don't think about. That is just something to know.
And that's the point with your clients that you don't compromise that part on.
No. No. That's your liability at that point.
Totally. Like you don't budge on overweighing the furniture on a 20-floor pool deck in Phoenix, Arizona. You know what I mean? That's gonna blow right off. In Dallas, there was actually a property that seventh floor pool down in town, chase lounges flew off during a storm. And at the time, my boss told everybody, like, hey, this is why we do it the way that we do. And you weight your furniture and you take those extra steps. If the client's gonna balk about pricing, find a different way to cut it out. Don't cut it out from the extra cost to weight your furniture on a patio that's so far in the sky. So that's a great point.
My biggest lesson learned was early on in my career is learning about seat heights. When you start to look at counter stools, when you're in a residential application, say a home, it's easy to find what's called a counter stool with the seat height. But in a commercial application, your countertop is typically 2 inches lower. You're not at 36 anymore, you're at 34 inches. Finding a stool that is appropriate that your legs or anyone's legs can fit under, for a matter of fact, can be challenging. One of the biggest things I learned is I one time I did specify the incorrect height. And that will never happen again. There's been a trend in waterfall countertops. And so sometimes with the infrastructure, depending on how long they are, a lot of times you're having to get your countertop ends up a little bit thicker because you need that infrastructure. You may have 3 inches in there with a drop down to try to accommodate some of the steel that's in there holding up the countertop. It just kind of depends. Just make sure that you're using your resources. Look it up. Just look at there's so many diagrams. Just look it up and don't second guess that. And it's important to make sure your seat heights are correct. I've been at hotels. I'm actually going to be working on one this next month on trying to correct some of the furniture decisions that were past decisions that they didn't look at. They had these lounge chairs that were specified with dining height tables and they didn't need to be that tall, so it's very uncomfortable to sit at them. That's one of the things to know, that it's you've got to pay attention to those types of details. Another thing, going back since we talked about banquettes, is just make sure also on banquettes, one of the things that I learned in the tour that I took recently that I didn't even realize that, because this manufacturer just does it, but now my team, we're actually specifying it on all of our different details. When you draw a detail of a banquette, a lot of times you're drawing some sort of box or infrastructure in there, studs. That cushion needs to breathe. So the air, it'll air back up, or, so it'll appropriately not get stuck, if you will. So if you've seen cushions that they sit on and they make noise, it's because they're not ventilated properly out the back. That air has to go somewhere. I didn't really realize that until I started seeing this skeleton that they were building, and it was like, why is that? And why has no one told me that in my career? And so I guess let's go ahead and end on the fact that it doesn't matter what experience level you're at. You're always going to be learning. If you're not learning, you're not growing. We can't enforce that enough.
I just find it so refreshing that us in our careers where we're at, we can still talk about our lessons learned because everybody is going to go through lessons learned. It's no matter what point you are in your career, if you make a mistake, we're here to say it's okay, just learn from it. Don't do it again. You heard both of us say when we finished our lessons learned that it would never happen again because that's what makes a good designer. Go through it. You don't let it ever happen again to a point where you're in your career and you've been through enough lessons learned that you're hopefully pretty close to perfect. I appreciate everybody for listening to our huge conversation about furniture. There's so much more into it. We'll make sure sure to open up a box so you can submit your questions and be able to answer some more technical questions on the FF&E side of things. And just knowing everybody does it their own way in a different way. And, there can be successful FF&E projects done through 20 different avenues. So I appreciate everybody for listening, and we thank you for being here.
Thank you guys for joining. Until next time.